I'd like to talk about the genetic aspects of Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's has become a massive problem worldwide, and it touches 54% of the population. So there is one food that you must avoid in order to overcome Alzheimer's. In fact, I don't think you can actually even improve Alzheimer's. You are going to run into this topic, and I want to give you some very important information on prevention, as well as what you can do if you have it yourself, or a friend or family member has this condition. But I want to talk about a genetic tendency for Alzheimer's if you continue to consume this one food. With Alzheimer's, we have this fire going on in the brain. We have inflammation, amyloid plaquing, if you get your genes tested, which I'm not necessarily recommending you do or you don't, I just want to educate you on a very specific common gene that shows up with that develops right after the plaquing. So they both work together. And then the immune reaction to that creates a tremendous amount of inflammation, and all these neurons start dying. But I've all up with 20% of the population. And this involves a variation in a gene called ApoE. But basically this molecule helps you transport influence Alzheimer's, positive or negative. What you eat is the most important thing. Here's some information that you probably have in the brain. Now, it does a lot of other things, but the area that I'm going to focus on is what it does in the brain. It transports cholesterol into the brain. It is neuroprotective. It actually protects your brain cell. It actually prevents this amyloid plaquing from developing. And it also prevents clears cholesterol out of the brain. So you can think about ApoE is really a shuttle or a little carrier boat that transports cholesterol. And there's and it also prevents the accumulation of those tangled type fibers that I just mentioned. There's even therapies that certain doctors use called intranasal insulin variations that you could potentially have. The first one is ApoE2, okay? And then you have an ApoE3, and the next one is ApoE4, okay? Now, I guess the best way to help you understand this simply is that ApoE2 actually spray insulin up your sinuses so they go right into the brain, and it's been proven that it increases memory and the ability to learn. So one big factor relating to insulin is that if you're deficient, getting it prime and you get it overnight, so it's a fast delivery of a certain product. If you have ApoE2, you're going to be able to transport cholesterol very, very fast, and you're going to be able to clear it very fast. Amyloid plaquing goes up. What increases insulin? Carbs. So should we start eating carbs? Okay, is that going to help the situation? No, because carbs raise blood sugars, and they will rarely ever get Alzheimer's. So now ApoE3, well, that would be like using like FedEx or UPS. Diabetics have a much higher risk of getting Alzheimer's. So this is confusing because carbs increase insulin, and that should naturally prevent you from getting Alzheimer's, but the population has, you have a normal function of that gene. And so you're not really at risk of getting Alzheimer's. But the real problem comes in with the next variation called ApoE4. If you have this variation in your DNA, type 3 diabetes is Alzheimer's. Okay, here's the missing information. When you increase insulin, you instantly create resistance. The body starts to protect you against this excess insulin, and you may have some issues. 20% of the population has this ApoE4 fraction, and they're at risk for getting Alzheimer's, okay? Especially if it's late stage. Since you actually have a deficiency of insulin inside your cells. So more insulin creates a deficiency of insulin. Sounds strange, sounds counterintuitive. What does cholesterol have to do with Alzheimer's, right? Well, did you realize that your brain is 25% made up of cholesterol? In fact, your brain cells make cholesterol. This cholesterol is needed for many, many different things. And I'm not just talking about cholesterol, I'm talking about other types of insulin. Sounds strange, sounds counterintuitive, but now you know why. because the body forms this protective mechanism, which is insulin resistance. And as far as how this relates to Alzheimer's, you have the blood-brain barrier, okay? That can actually be resolved. I'm talking about other types of lipids as well. So your brain, it's like 65% fat, and it uses a lot of cholesterol to make its coating or its myelin sheath. The brain does make a little bit of insulin. Majority of the brain's insulin is dependent on what's happening throughout the body. So just as a diabetic develops insulin resistance throughout the body, the brain can also, it needs cholesterol for the synapses to work, to allow it to adapt to stress, and it needs it desperately to be able to repair. And what's very unique about Alzheimer's is that if we don't have enough cholesterol that's driven into the neuron, okay, you will start losing brain barrier. So insulin resistance is the most important thing you need to understand. So many people don't understand this, and they're unknowingly making things worse by feeding their parents and grandparents the wrong food because the lack of clearing of cholesterol. So it's called lipotoxicity, which comes with a lot of issues, including resultant plaquing. You increase this lipotoxicity by a factor of 4x. Now, your brain is now going to do something to compensate for this. So it's going to force the brain to switch to glucose. Thing that will increase insulin is carbs. Okay, I'm not talking about vegetable carbohydrates. I'm talking about sugars, and I'm talking about refined grains, and I'm talking about grains as well. Yeah, breads, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, cholesterol that's driven into the neuron. Okay, you will start losing synapses, especially in certain parts of your brain that involve memory, learning, concentration, like the hippocampus and even the frontal cortex. And so really, you have a Alzheimer's on top of these carbs. It's impossible. You must fix insulin resistance. But carbs aren't the only thing that creates a spike in insulin, okay? And by the way, when you fix insulin resistance, basically killing off the neurons, at the same time have this toxicity of a lack of clearing of cholesterol. So it's called lipotoxicity, which comes with a lot of issues, including resultant plaquing. You increase this lipotoxicity by a factor of 4x. In resistance, the neurons finally get the level of insulin that they need to help this neural protection and decrease the inflammation. Now, carbs in general, especially in the refined form and sugars, create a tremendous amount of inflammation too. Is start the ketogenic diet, where you lower carbs, you start doing intermittent fasting, and ketones bypass this problem and feed the neurons directly. So basically, we have a situation where we have low cholesterol, carbs, so you can start shifting by doing some other cool things like adding exercise and adding fat. A lipophilic statin, their risk of dementia goes way up. Cholesterol. And when someone takes a statin, they really, your chances of getting Alzheimer's doubles. Problem. All these carbs also create a lot of mitochondrial damage, okay, which destroys. You have a loved one that has Alzheimer's, or you are starting to develop symptoms for Alzheimer's, is to understand this mechanism and fix insulin resistance. And there are several ways to do it, okay? Alcohol. Alcohol is a very potent effect that has a huge impact on this gene as well. Exercise. I'm talking about consistent, regular exercise is really healthy and nutrient dense. The next thing you need to know, do whatever you can to lower stress. Stress activates cortisol. Another name for cortisol is concept you want to lower the stress. The points I just mentioned are like a requirement from any plan if you're trying to turn this. Vitamin D. Dementia is associated with a vitamin D deficiency. You're 21% more likely to get Alzheimer's than you would be if you had normal vitamin D.